Hi everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, and it's great to see that we have a big turnout for our topic. My name is Ethel Nugent. I'm your host today, and we're dealing with a very important topic, certainly at the beginning of the year, is refine and refresh your HR technology roadmap. So just in terms of myself, I am the workforce specialist with Navigo. My background is in workforce analytics, workforce design and transformation, and I've actually been on both sides of the fence, which means I've been on the side of the fence as the customer seeking new technology or implementing new technology. I've been in this space for well over 30 years, so I've also been in the time when there was no tools around, through to now where there's a plethora of tools around, which probably makes it quite difficult to make good choices. And so it's really timely that we're having the conversation we're going to have today, because it's really important to have that inside track when you are looking at what's your technology stack and how does it line up. I'm very excited today to be joined by Stacey Harris. Stacey is the Chief Research Officer and Managing Director of the Sapient Insights Group. She's worked in executive roles with Sierra Cedar and with Berison and Associates. She's been a long-time friend with us in Navigo. She's a leading thought leader. She's been a speaker at many events, and we are privileged to have her here today.
Thanks, Ethel. Yes, no, I'm looking forward to talking to everyone. And hello, everyone. I am calling, it's my evening, your morning. So it's about 7, 8 o'clock, 6 o'clock at night here in the United States, where I'm calling from Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. So I'm excited to be able to see such a wide mix of attendees. I'm thrilled by this. We've got HR system managers, change managers, human resource advisors, executives on the presentation. So Prajna put this together for us, and we just love seeing the mix of people who are attending the session today. We're really excited to be able to answer all your questions. As Ethel says, we want this to be a conversation, so please feel free to chat in the window. If you have any questions, we will wait to the end to answer most of them, but we'll try and sort of fill them in if we can while we're watching, and also chat with each other. It's always good to get a conversation going.
So, hey, for anybody who doesn't know much about Navigo, we're Melbourne based. We've been in this space for over 20 years in terms of payroll and HR technology. We're known for workforce analytics, visualization, org design. We've got a number of, well over 150 successful go lives in the last 5 years, and obviously locally based, and we service Australia and New Zealand. And I will now hand you back to you, Stacey.
Thanks, Ethel. Yeah. And Sapient Insights Group is a research and advisory firm. We are located in the United States, but I've been doing research for over 25, well, the research that we're going to be covering today has been done for over 25 years, and it's global. And as an organization, we focus on helping organizations make big decisions on their HR and finance systems, both from our research and our advisory practices. And we were really excited to partner up with Navigo because I think we've got a similar concept about the fact that we want to help people sort of not only just implement technology, but make sure that it's adopted and it's leveraged and it's used inside their organizations. So a big part of our organization is focusing on culture and building and leadership coaching, those type of things, to make sure that you've got the team in place to be able to do all the exciting new work that comes out of many of these system implementations. So if you have any questions about us, please feel free to follow up after the session. The research that I'll be covering today, so some of you may or may not know, I did do a big presentation. Boy, it was actually 2019. I was speaking, I think, at the HR Tech Fest in 2019. It was my first trip to Australia, which I loved. And it was the first time we had enough data in the Asia Pacific market to be able to do some really big breakouts. And so our research has been done for over 25 years. This is the 25th year. Started out in 1997. You might know Lexi Martin, who started it. And she ran it for 17 years. And then I was lucky enough to take it over from her. It was under a couple of different brands, Hunter Group, Sierra Cedar, Cedar Crestone, you might know them as. But about 2 years ago, just around 2020, Sierra Cedar chose to allow us to spin off the research, and basically allowed me and 2 other partners to take the research and continue to honor it and move it forward underneath the Sapient Insights Group brand as our own company, which I'm now a managing partner of. And so we're continuing to invest in this research annually, and it is the largest and most expansive research in the HR technology space, We cover what organizations are adopting, what type of technology they're putting in place around HR, what type of processes they're putting in place around those technologies, the approaches they're taking to putting them in place, and how much it's costing, budgeting, resourcing, all of those things. This year, we had over 5,000 people actually participate in the research. We clean our data extensively, which gets it down to about 2,500 or individual organization data sets. Takes about 2 months to clean our data. We get rid of all the junk. We get rid of all the people who sort of give us 6 answers for the same company, consolidate. We had over 65 countries with people responding in those headquartered locations. And we had over 698 global organizations in our data set. And this year, we had about 8% of our data that came out of the Asia Pacific market, but that's a huge number when you think about the total number of respondents in our data set. We were just really excited to see how much we got out of the market. And we were particularly grateful of the partnership we had with Navigo and helping us sort of continue to add to this space. We're really wanting to continue to add to the data set here in the Asia Pacific market year over year to make sure that we can give you guys good benchmarking data, good insights as to what's happening in this end of the market. And hopefully even where I could break out the data, I did break out the data for just the Australia market, but sometimes it got a little bit too small. So you'll see Asia Pacific with an Australia kind of component of the breakouts. But as I noted, our research isn't just about what big systems you're using. Our research really covers the entire HR technology spectrum. What this image in front of you is our HR systems adoption blueprint, which has basically been developed over the last 25 years around how organizations buy technology, how they categorize it, what processes they put around it. And we have found over time that sometimes things change from category to category, but overall, this infrastructure generally is how people tend to sort of look at their HR technology environments. We always generally see that organizations who do the best start the conversation about their HR technology environments around their data and their strategy and their culture. Not every organization does this, but we find that gives you the best outcomes. And that's why we put it at the center of this, because the more strategic organizations, that's how they're starting to buy technology. And right now there's about 6 categories that we see in the market: the core HR, service delivery technologies, time and talent management, and then analytics and planning. And there's always some form of emerging technologies like wearables or predictive analytics that's building up in the market, but isn't quite its own platform yet. And so that generally falls in our emerging technology category. We also cover all of those processes that without them, we know won't really, technology in and of itself doesn't have an impact without things like whether or not it's tied into your network security process or your mobile approach in your organization or your social responsibility approach, or maybe your integration strategies. We're going to talk a lot about that today, because as good as the technology is, the things you put around it make an even bigger impact. And then ultimately we see today in the world that we're living in, our workforce productivity and finance systems and customer relationship systems and vendor management systems, all the types of systems that we work in our organizations have to feed into our HR applications to make them more valuable, particularly as we start to see things like our Microsoft tools, our Google tools, our business analytics tools really become big parts of people data gathering tool sets. And now we have to really think about how all that integration happens. So this is a good way if you're looking for a tool to kind of frame how you think about HR technology. And it is also how we design our research and the categories that we cover everything in. One of the big questions that we ask every year that everybody wants to understand is whether or not HR technology spending will be increasing or decreasing, and particularly after the last couple of years that we've had. Obviously in 2020, you see that huge dip in the percentage of organizations who had plans for increasing and plans for decreasing their HR technology went up. But then what was really nice to see is that in 2021, that quick bump back up, basically a nice little bounce up. The market was doing well. The industries were doing well. Your talent was doing well. What we were really interested in seeing this year was it going to stay at that state? Did that bump up continue to hold? And I know, although in general across the market, we know that there has been a lot of conversation about recession markets or about economic times that organizations are struggling with. But in general, we're seeing at the HR tech side that the spending is planning to continue to stay at the same level and or increasing. We saw a slight decrease. Most of that decrease in organizations was in organizations under 500 employees. We broke this out by region. So one of the things that's interesting is that if you look at this by region, the Asia Pacific market and the EMEA market are much more likely to be increasing their HR technology spending even than what we're seeing in the North America market, which I think sometimes often we feel like the North America market sometimes is spending a lot in this space. We're finding a lot more investments in the EMEA and the Asia Pacific market from an increasing perspective. There's just a lot more room to grow there in many cases from an HR technology perspective. We are seeing more decreases in the EMEA market as well, but not as much in the Asia Pacific market. And when we asked organizations, why are you increasing your HR technology in the Asia Pacific market, it was much more focused on improving HR efficiency than anything else. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, because that's a really important goal, particularly for organizations who either are moving from much smaller vendors to larger vendors, or different processes, or maybe suites of products or things, right? But it's also a big issue if you're moving from more paper-based or maybe outsourcing models to non-outsourcing models. And so we're seeing a lot of different reasons why organizations are trying to become more HR efficient. But we're also seeing, you'll see the next two important things are improving HR data and increasing the workforce. Those are big reasons that we don't see increasing workforce as a big issue in EMEA or North America. You can move on to the next slide. You're good, Praja. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to mention that increasing the workforce is because we're seeing in the Asia Pacific market, more so than we're seeing in North America or EMEA, that the Asia Pacific market is still having big talent management issues. Now, we're seeing talent issues across the board, EMEA more so as well. But what we're finding is that over the last several years, we've continued to see a drop in the ability for organizations to retain and attract top talent. And in Asia Pacific, that's dropped over the last 2 years, about 14% and 10% for the various questions that we ask. And the available workforce data has increased, which is good to know, but it's not helping as much as we hoped it would to really fill that gap issue. 42% of organizations in the Asia Pacific market plan to increase their hiring over where they were at the pre-pandemic numbers. That's considerably higher than when we saw in any of the other regions. And 49% of them have a fully remote or hybrid workforces today, which means, and just to give you some relevance, before the pandemic in the Asia Pacific market, that was below 6%, right? Had a fully remote, and it was I think it was only 10 or 11% that was at hybrid level, much lower percentages compared to where we're at today. So not only are we having talent challenges, but you're continuing to deal with a very highly remote and hybrid workforces. Again, we're seeing more remote and hybrid workforces here in the Asia Pacific market than we are in the North America market. So that actually gives us some insight into what the areas where organizations are actually planning to increase HR technology spending. In the Asia Pacific market as a whole, you're very similar to what we see in the aggregate data set. Recruiting is number one everywhere, no matter where you're at. I know you might be saying, well, if the market is slowing down, why is recruiting so important? Well, we just saw that data on talent management and the gaps in talent and skills. And we're also seeing that even as the market slows down a little bit, organizations are realizing that they couldn't get the skills they needed over the last several years. Many of us found that we had to close stores, had to close businesses, had to stop production lines because we didn't have the people to actually work. And so we're finding a lot of organizations taking this opportunity where there's a little bit of a lull to replace recruiting technology that did not meet their needs over the last 2 years. And then here in the Asia Pacific market, big issues around HR analytics, learning and training, benefits and wellness, much more on the wellness and mental health, we think, than just benefits alone. And then skills management is one of the big ones here. And if you look at this is one of the areas where I was able to break that out by the Australia market just by itself. Recruiting, HR analytics, but the number 3 in the Australia market is HR workforce planning. And this, I think, is, Ethel and I had a big conversation about this because, again, those talent gaps, those skill challenges, workforce planning becomes really important when you're trying to manage those issues. And we're definitely seeing that as a top issue here in the Australia market, along with things like learning and training and intelligent tools. All right. So why is, when you wrap all of this conversation up and we look at where the market is heading, spending is important, why I'm spending it, the kind of technology that I'm going to buy is all important. But none of it really matters if we're not able to use that technology to make a difference in our organizations. And ultimately, what we find is that year over year, we ask organizations, are you viewed as a strategic business partner inside of your organization? And we were seeing steadily increases across our aggregate data set from 2014 to about 2017. And then it kind of stalled out at 45% for over 7 years. And I thought this will be the year. We went through COVID. We went through all those challenges. this will be the year we'll see a big bump up, and it didn't happen. And what we're really finding is that organizations oftentimes feel they're on the way to being a strategic partner, but they're not fully viewed as a strategic partner. And we want to basically challenge the market to say, no, we want to see at least 55% of the market say, yes, we're viewed as a strategic HR business partner across our organizations, adding value to the bottom line by 2025, because there's so much impact. And the Asia Pacific market, and particularly Australia, has real opportunities here, because only 30% of the Asia Pacific organizations who participated in our survey said they were viewed as strategic partners, and only 31% of the Australian organizations. And why this is so important is when we look at organizations who are viewed as compliance function, or even just almost getting there, which means they're doing a lot of best practices, they're doing all the work, but the business maybe isn't seeing the total value. The amount of outcomes that they get in talent, HR, and business, like competitive advantage or innovation or market share, we assess all of these. And we've done this analysis year over year. This isn't just a one-time analysis. I've done this year over year. This is 5 years of data that we're looking at just in this particular analysis. These are true correlations that we can prove year over year again. And again, correlation doesn't mean causation if you're looking at data, but it does mean there's a real connection between organizations who are viewing their HR function as a strategic business and the double-digit outcomes of talent, HR, and business outcomes. And that can't be, I can't emphasize that enough, that you just don't get enough out of doing almost good enough. You get so much more out of doing the partnership level conversations that you need to have. And one of the big things that really makes a difference is how you're seen as a partner, right? It comes down to some very simple HR practices, and they have a lot less to do with the technology. Those organizations who invest in having an enterprise HR system strategy, that means you kind of have a vision of where you're heading with your HR technology and you evaluate it on a regular basis. Those organizations who have an integration strategy for their HR systems that tie to their enterprise business strategy. And those organizations who practice what we call adaptive change management. So an ongoing change management model, not just project-based, see on average 15% higher outcomes year over year and are much more likely to be viewed as strategic HR partners. There's nothing out there that is going to get you more impact than these three things inside your organizations from an HR and HR technology perspective. So let me just look at what percentage of organizations have that in the Asia Pacific market. Only 30% of organizations said they had an enterprise HR system strategy that they evaluated regularly. Only 18% of organizations said they had an integration strategy that they connected to their HR systems. And only 27% of organizations said they had an employee data strategy that they had in place to go with those integration and HR system strategy. That's concerning that we're not farther, but I will say that since 2020, we saw a 69% increase in the percentage of organizations who've had an employee data strategy. So we know it can be done quickly when there's things like COVID crisis, or when we know there's pandemics around the corner. We know these things can get changed when people find there's value behind them. And what we have to really do is find the business cases to make people understand how valuable they can be to the outcomes. And the change management, only 31% of organizations have what we call adaptive change management inside their organizations. And yet this is the number one thing that you can do. Put everything else aside, even having a strategy on HR systems, having an integration strategy. Let's not talk about what systems you have. If you just put in place ongoing adaptive change management, which means you're really looking at adoption, you're really looking at the process work, you're really looking at ongoing updates to communications and conversations with your executives, we find that that's a 20% or more on average outcome impact over anything else that we have seen in the market. And again, I've done this analysis for over 8 years myself. And believe me, I look for all other kind of things, because if I could tell a single vendor that they were the reason why someone got a 20% impact improvement, they'd all pay me an awful lot more money than what I get paid. But it's not, it comes down to the change management, it comes down to integration. So here's what's not going to make a difference. And I think this is just as important as what's going to make a difference in your HR technology approach and strategy. Specific vendors, I hate to tell you, it doesn't matter what vendor you have, the newest, the oldest, what solution you're using, those don't seem to have a big impact. We've seen organizations with the oldest technology and with the newest technology get some of the similar impact outcomes. It has to do a lot more with the other things we talked about. Your deployment models, your process maturity, your outsourcing decisions, your years of ownership, your total technology in use, whether you have one system or 20 different systems, doesn't seem to, again, make big difference if you're doing these things. The resourcing, I know this one is a hard one because I would like to say just more people would give us more ability to make change. Our numbers don't show that. More professional HRs help make you more efficient and oftentimes get you better outcomes from the HR outcomes you're trying to achieve, but it doesn't always improve talent or business outcomes. And then service delivery models, even that doesn't have a huge impact. One of the things we hear everybody talking about these days is experience platforms and how we need to change the experience. I completely agree that we need to focus on the experience. But what we find is that those organizations who tie their experience conversation that they're having, not to a specific platform, but to the outcomes they're trying to achieve as a business, they find they get much more out of that experience conversation when it comes to their HR technology environments. So for example, if you want to really think about the high touch or low touch requirements of your HR investment, right? Whether you want to have a collaborative experience for your employees or more of a self-service experience for your employees. And you might have different experiences at different levels. You might need a collaborative experience at your executive level. You might need more of a self-service expensive experience on your front line. These are all such big critical issues, right? And what we find is a lot of people think that a certain software or a certain category of software is going to address an overall experience for their employee, when in fact, if they haven't designed the workflows and they haven't designed the configuration appropriately, they could very well have the newest technology and the coolest new performance management systems and experience platforms in the market and end up with, if not better experiences, sometimes even worse experiences because they're disjointed. One of the things I think that's really important is what are the signals when you need to change your software? It isn't just about the fact that, you know, we talked about that you have experiences that you're trying to create, or you're trying to change new software, or you're just trying to make your organization more modern. All of those are critical conversations to be having, but it needs to be in the context of that strategy we talked about. And in the context of that strategy, in the context of the outcomes you're trying to achieve as a business, one of the things that oftentimes comes up is that, look, as a business, we're trying to achieve really important things. I'll tell one story here, and then I think this is going to really emphasize what I mean by this. I used to work for a large retail chain, right? And we were working on this really, really powerful system decision change. We were like, okay, are we going to change from our big enterprise ERP system? Are we going to leave it? We're going to go to a new one. And one of the conversations that we had was about what were the biggest needs in the organization around from a sales perspective. Now, this is an organization that sold a lot of fabric. And so everybody in the organization thought fabric was the most important thing because that was the conversation, it was the brand of the organization. It was where it was getting all of its business from. But when you really talk to the people in the organization who were actually in charge of the finances and those who were in charge of the product areas, what you found out was that it was actually the stuff that was at the front of the house, like candy and buttons and bows, called notions at that point in time, that actually gave you better margins. And if we were able to sell those more, you would support what was a very low margin business, which is fabric. Fabric only you get 1 to 2% on margin. And what they found out is that the one system did a better job of optimizing those things that had more pieces and parts like these notions. And one system did a better job managing making more efficient the fabric business. So with that language that they were talking, you had a much better conversation about the fact, oh, as a business and as a financial outcome, we need to be focusing on the area where we're going to get the higher margins. And all of a sudden that HR conversation was less about replacing an ERP system and that it wasn't old and clunky, and it was more about, well, we need to sell more notions. What is it we need to do to put in the hands of the employees the tools they need to do that? And so here's when you really need to think about your new replacing HR software. You need to think about the answer if the answer to every question about the data you need around your HR people is that you have to export the data, that's a good sign that it's time to be able, because it's not a dashboard, it's not a workflow, it's not a place that I can go get it, it's to export the data and recrunch it in Excel. If the mission critical processes are being completed manually, so if you look across your organization and, for example, if selling things like buttons are more important to us and the process for explaining buttons to everybody is manual, well, that's a problem. You need to make sure that those are sort of addressed more quickly. Integrations are constantly broken or need upgrading, especially when other systems are being updated. Help desk calls are increasing versus going down. We see this all the time. And finally, if business leaders don't have the data or the reports they need to make critical decisions, one of the questions we ask every year is, how are you using your technology in the organization? Are you using it to inform business decisions or to inform your enterprise strategy? And only about 30% of the market is using it to actually inform full strategies, and only about 50% are using it to inform business decisions around their workforce. If your business leaders don't feel like this technology is helping them actually make decisions, maybe it's time to start thinking about a new technology and tool. And Ethel, this is where I think you and I have the best conversations, because it is about those outcomes and how you achieve those outcomes and the change. So I'm going to hand it back to you at this point to maybe wrap up, and then we can answer some questions for the audience.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stacey. And just look, I just want to explain to the audience, we gave Stacey probably a very difficult task. There's actually a very comprehensive report behind everything that Stacey had produced there, but we just wanted to pick out some of the key things I think that are relevant to this region. And I will talk shortly about how you can get your hands on the report. And also we want to talk about how we can get more representation from this region into the next version of the report, because I think it would really add to our understanding. I wanted to pick up a few points that you made, Stacey, and I put this slide in here, particularly for APAC and obviously here in Australia and New Zealand. There were some really interesting points that you made there, that the emphasis here is on getting more HR efficiency. And it's across all these areas that we have on the slide here. And also about how the wholesale change to sort of remote and hybrid working, how that's putting probably a greater emphasis on the decisions that we're making in our HR stack as being things that will take us along a journey towards more, as say, not an export, but towards more either management self-service or employee self-service, because we have got smaller teams. Those teams are required to do more, whether they're in the HR or associated HR areas. And so we need to bring those things into our overall HR technology decision making. And where I'm putting this into perspective is you'll be somewhere along your HR maturity roadmap. You may be still at the left-hand side, where you're still in a very centralized, sort of high-touch, probably low data-driven delivery model. And obviously, what I wanted to paint here is whatever choices you're making now in your HR stack or in the future to improve that efficiency, to deal with the sort of remote or hybrid workforce and to deal with smaller teams, you really need to be looking to move yourself along this roadmap, but make choices with solutions and vendors that can take you through this. So move you through from providing even a managed service through to where you are having solutions that are giving you greater management or employee self-service so that you can deliver your services no matter where people are at. And I think where we all want to get to, and I've been on that side of the fence where I've been either working with businesses to transform their operational processes, is to get where the solutions that we have in place are allowing us to build a center of excellence and a community of practice. They're allowing us to enhance the user empowerment and allowing us to enhance the adoption so we get those extended business outcomes that we wish for. I have read quite a lot of the report. I'm still working through it from Stacey, but one of the key things I did pull out, I thought it was an interesting point, and particularly because we are interested in analytics, and I'm particularly interested in workforce analytics and transformation. It said that the average organization was using 2.6 different types of tools to meet their analytics and planning needs. And having been on that side of the fence where I've been either developing RFPs or doing the implementation of transformation, down the bottom of the things that I've been looking for in the tool sets that when I've been assisting companies in terms of their workforce, tool set, you really do need to look for a tool that is going to give you multiple levels of functionality and really getting into that functionality conversation early. Yes, if everything's an export, that's a problem, but you do need to be able to get your data in and out as needed. You are looking for something that's going to help you benchmark. Visualization should be bread and butter these days. We should be able to do both sides of the coins very easily with any of the solutions that we're doing, where we can see the detailed data. We know we're hooked into our data. That employee data is on the rise, thank goodness. But we're also able to see the powerful visuals at the same time. And obviously, you would be looking for those predictive or modeling features in whatever you're looking to purchase. I talked a little bit about the functionality conversation. I've done a lot of this work where I've been asked to, get involved with RFPs, run the panels. We bring in 2 or 3 vendors or 5 or 6. We get down to the shortlist, and they all look great at the features level. They all do tick, tick, tick. And then when you get into the functionality conversation, you realize the gaps are there. So I can't stress enough that as you're building your HR technology roadmap or you're refreshing it, that this area needs a lot of work. You need to put your solution vendors through their paces so that they can give you that you feel that you're in safe hands from a functionality perspective. And I think the last one I wanted to talk about, and Stacey mentioned this about, it's not just about the project, it's what you wrap around the project. And again, I've often been on both sides. So on the left-hand side, I've been on the project focus, getting the business case in place, putting in the stages, getting the vendors on board, moving it through the various stages for implementation. But I am actually also a change practitioner, so I'm very much also on the right-hand side, and can't stress enough that as you're working through your HR roadmap, change has to be front and central to this. There's a preparation phase, there's an acceptance phase, and a commitment phase. And what you should be looking for, both from the solutions that you're looking to put in place and from the partners that you're working with, is that they can take you and your organization along this journey from that contact, early awareness, through to actually understanding the product, developing a positive perception, and assisting you to get through adoption and it becoming the way of working. And what I mean here is, your solution vendors should be able to partner with you at any stage here. They should be able to be part of your change journey. They should be able to support you with showcasing, drop-ins, stand-up sessions, whatever Q&A are required. There should be sand pits available so that people can get in and play. So you're moving people reasonably quickly up to the positive perception and all the way through. The little dotted lines, because I've been there, is if that's done poorly, if we're too focused on the project or we're too focused on the solution itself and we're not focused on the people, and remember we're talking about more hybrid workforces, more need for self-service, then we fall off that trajectory very quickly and we end up with the alternative outcomes, which are on the lower part of the screen, which is confusion, some negative perception, obviously resistance, and what we don't want to end up with is unrealized benefits. So I just wanted to bookend that. It's certainly a passion of mine, and I was really interested that it was obviously coming out very clearly in the respondents that had answered the Sapient report, and I thought I would like to just bookend that. Okay, you're probably all wondering, okay, we've heard a lot. How do we get a hold of this report? So first off, what's covered in it? You're going to get quite a lot of detail around, looking at your HR systems blueprint, your strategy, and then it drops into very detailed information and feedback from the respondents around applications, time management, talent management, analytics planning, and emerging trends. So there's really a lot in there. We will send you the details, and I think we're going to pop into the chat a link for how you can get access. Great, there you go. Prajna's put it in, but we will also send out details after the webinar today, along with the recording for the webinar. There's a lot in there. We would encourage you to reach out to us. I can direct you to any other information that you may have that may support your business case, or anything that you want to just discuss further. Please reach out to us. So we also want to just point out that we're limbering up for the next version of this. It was a case that when we took a look at how detailed the information for APAC was, we didn't have as strong a representation as we would like, and so we're really encouraging you to sign up. We will send some details later this year, probably around May, so that you sign up and that we can get a greater representation for APAC, so that we feel that we've really got that larger sample size and we can draw more insights. With Navigo, we used to do the tech survey report, but we have found that there is much greater value for us to be involved with the Sapient report. There's a lot more there, and we're hoping to bring that to you. So keep an eye out for the survey. The link will be coming out and the invites will be coming out around May this year. And obviously, we're more than happy for you to share that out with others, because the more we get in this area, the better we can draw those insights. I did have one question I was going to ask Stacey, and it was, I suppose, about I'd be really keen, I think, to understand more, and maybe it's a question for the upcoming survey, is to really dig into that remote and hybrid working and its relationship with the need for more self-service going forward. I think we've seen that like real step change from the pandemic. We're seeing it in Australia. We have very large diverse workforces across a very broad continent, just like North America. So I'd be really keen to see where is Sapient going with its sort of questions and its research in that space, because I think it would add a lot of value, certainly for us. We're quite scattered around this country, and we don't have as many urban centres, and really interested in that sort of remote hybrid working, and also the fact that we have got smaller workforces, so we're trying to do a lot more. So just in terms of the next report, where are we going in that space in terms of your lines of inquiry?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're seeing so much sort of interest in sort of, and we actually have some data on this. The hard part is we get so much great data because and be for one, it's a big survey. Just it is, because for us to look across the entire HR system environment, you do have to answer a lot of different areas of system data sets. And so I tell people, stick with it, even if it feels like, boy, this is getting to be a long survey, because it's you have to really think of it much more like an annual check-in with your own HR system environment. We get about 20% of organizations who say they take it every year because it gives them an opportunity to basically assess their own current environment and ask critical questions. One of the big critical questions that came out from people this year was the hybrid work environments. They wanted to understand sort of what were the different types of working models. So we actually have some data on that. It's not in the report. We're going to do a separate report out about that data this year, but we'll ask more about it next year. So are people doing 3-day work weeks or 2-day work weeks and in the office here and when so there were some questions about like, what are the type of hybrid work environments are people using? The other thing that we ask every year, or that we're probably going to ask a little bit more, is like, what's the technology you're using to help support your hybrid work environment? I will say the number one tool in 2020 and in 2021 was Microsoft. Not surprising, right? I think particularly in the United States, Microsoft became a big tool, particularly when they rolled out their Teams platform. We see in the APAC market a little bit more of sort of diverse tool sets, a little more Google, a little more WeChats, a little more those kind of things, right? But we are definitely seeing more of the social technology being the impetus for where people are investing money and finances from a hybrid workforce model, right? I think the other question that we often get around the hybrid workforce is things like, how do I manage onboarding? How do I manage, documentation management? How do I manage things like tracking and performance? So we're seeing more increase, especially for small businesses. More small businesses are actually planning to invest in performance management this year than we've seen in the last 5 years. And we think that's because of the hybrid workforces, because it was a lot easier when I had everybody in an office of 25. Now everybody's virtual. Do I track the movements of the mouse, which we know has not been a good thing online, and those are terrible things to do, but we're seeing it happen. Do I track how often I see them in Zoom cloud environments? And so they're trying to figure out, what is my new performance metrics for people if they're working in hybrid environments. And so those are some of the questions that we are already asking, but we'll probably do more analysis on next year as well.
Great, thank you. We just also had one other question pop up in terms of recommendations around workforce planning tools. What can you tell us is in the report around that?
Yeah, this is a hard. So we have data on what we have data basically on what tools organizations are using for workforce planning in the report, and we have what percentage of organizations are planning to increase spending on workforce planning tools in the report. And it is planning, I think it's almost like a 20% increase plan for workforce planning tools, right? The difference is that the challenge with the workforce planning market is that most of it, just to be very upfront with everyone, larger organizations are generally using their core HRMS plus some sort of a financial planning tool, like maybe an Anaplan or a Hyperion or something like that, plus then some sort of an analytics platform like a Vizier or a One Model or something, right? And they're kind of combining all of those tools to get what they need in the workforce planning space. Smaller organizations, we're finding, are using some of the newer sort of organizational network analysis tools that are out there for workforce planning, right? We're starting to see some of them use some of the, there's a little organization out of actually Australia that's actually just starting to come into the US market called Equate that we've seen sort of doing some things. Organizations like in dentists that we've talked about, right? Like they're doing more like succession planning and broader sort of change inside of organizations. So a lot of the smaller organizations are, I would say, using unique tool sets to get to their workforce planning strategies. But the one thing that we know in the market is that we haven't yet seen a platform that does everything. Just nothing at this point has the entire capability that we need in workforce planning. And a lot of it is because workforce planning, when it's done really strategically, starts with a different question oftentimes in every company. And it has to have all that business data as part of it. And so you've really got to have kind of a mixture of business, HR, and people data that all goes into it. So it's a good question though. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, yes, as you say, it requires you to get into that. What are you trying to achieve and what functionality will help you achieve that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was intrigued by your last chart. I think that's a fabulous chart, by the way, which really talks about sort of where people put most of their effort, which, yes, this one here.
Yes.
And that ways of working, because we call what we call sort of this continuous change management, sort of adaptive change management. We hear the word agile change management. We find that organizations who do project change management, which is sort of a more traditional, like there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, they don't get as good of outcomes. Do you have a sense, as you're watching organizations do change management, around the difference between sort of this ongoing change management and how do organizations maintain that sort of longevity when they've got new systems coming in all the time?
Okay, I'm going to try and give you a short answer to what's a very good question, but in my experience, to do this right, your change has to be seen as part of the overall transformation. But you're not just transforming on one level. You're transforming at a process level, you're transforming at a personal level, and an operating model level, and at a capability level. And if your company or if the project is properly hooked into those from a process level, you know what processes you are changing from an enterprise process perspective. From a workforce level, you have a good handle on what your workforce looks like, what its characteristics, what its capability, what its skill gaps, where it's located. That's that piece. From an operating model perspective, you have to understand, if I bring in this technology, what is the before and after? Are people going to be doing more or less? It's hard to say, am I going to need more or less people? Am I going to be extending the services? And then you've got to say, how do I build and maintain this capability? So the change actually needs to go right across that. And that is real transformational change. And you start to go through this journey from a really early stage. One of the questions I have done in my practice when I have been starting out, so sometimes I would get called in, we're going to do a big transformation. It's 5 years long or 3 years long or 7 years long. We're talking a really long time. One of the first things I would always do with, the key stakeholders, whether it's IT, business, the decision makers, etc., I'd say, do you believe this is taking you in the right direction? And depending on that answer, I would know whether I was up for a hard time trying to transform and bring this group through change or not. But the right answer was, well, we know where we want to go. And yes, this is the first starting point. And then as I would explore that with them, if they had got, a sound handle on what they were going to do from a process, a personnel, an operating model, and a capability perspective, then I could, I suppose I calmed down a little bit about how are we going to bring that workforce and the technology together. And I could feel that this picture, which I have used many times, actually was going to, start to resonate very early with people. So I think that's an important question to talk about in the change equation. Do you believe this is taking you in the right direction? And how I've answered that is I have challenged organizations and I have made them do a survey at the very beginning of a transformation program. And that's often been the key question. And it's a really interesting one because you hear from people and they go, no, I don't think this is going to work. So you know that you're down, right down in that sort of contact and awareness stage around why you're doing it. So I'm trying to give you a real nutshell answer to what's a really big thing around the importance of the change and the adaptive change, but it's got to come from a number of angles. But that's my number one question. Is it taking?
I love that question.
Do I know what that
should be writing that question down if you haven't already.
Yeah. And happy, obviously, just for the audience, we didn't intend this to be obviously about change, but you can't talk about your technology stack and your HR roadmap without not talking also about change. So very happy for you to reach out. We do have other tools available that, may assist you if you are looking at how do we how do we go on that journey, or how do we refresh that journey, please do reach out and we'll put you in the right direction.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. I mean, change is a big part of it, but it is those integrations and those strategies that make such a big difference. It really, I always often tell people it's the hardest work and the stuff that you feel like you don't have time for that makes the biggest impact. So yeah.
What I'd like to do, I would like to say thank you very much, Stacey. I said we put you on the spot. It's a very large report, and we have explained, people will get their hands on it. I'm sure there'll be more questions arising. So please just direct those back through me. I'll make sure they get through to Stacey. We encourage you to participate in our next survey. I think it can only go from strength to strength. And I would like to thank everybody, whether you have joined in the morning or indeed in your evening or afternoon or whatever part of the world you're in. It's been a pleasure to have you here today, a pleasure to hear from you, Stacey. And I look forward to seeing some of our attendees on a future webinar.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I do, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, connect with me. We really want to create to make sure that we have a good solid set of data for next year. So anything we can do to help along the way, please let us know. So
thank you. And thank you, Prajna, and we'll be in touch, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.